Good. Welcome, everyone. I'm Moritz Schularick. I'm the president of the Kiel Institute, and we are Germany's leading global research institute looking into global economic affairs. We're very happy to team up with the Munich Security Conference here and have a fantastic panel to discuss a question that has come back with full force, namely guns versus butter, the role of military and importance of military and social spending for politics and for budget, for fiscal policy going forward. What we're going to do is Christoph Trebesch, who's a professor at the Institute, will present the latest research coming out of our institute, giving us a frame to think about the guns versus butter question really from a long-term perspective. And then we will turn to a fantastic panel. Evika, Siliņa, the Prime Minister of Latvia, is with us. We have Norbert Röttgen, the probably the most prominent figure in German defense and security policy for years, and Niall Ferguson, professor at Stanford University in the Hoover Institute. And if I may add that, he was on my doctoral committee, so we have a long history going back. And Niall has worked on this question for a long time. 20 years ago, he started this amazing research. But without further ado, I hand over to Christoph Trebesch, and we're excited to hear about your new research, and then we go into the conversation. Thanks for being here.
Thanks a lot, Moritz. Hello, everybody. It's a great opportunity to present first results from a research project that has been long in the making, together with Johannes Marzian. The motivation of the project is that we know too little about the link between geopolitics and budgets, government budgets, so how governments prioritize spending. And we generally know surprisingly little about the history of public finance going back more than a few decades. The military spending data is quite patchy, and we have even less data for other types of spending purposes. So what we do in this project is to put together a new quantitative history of government finance, collecting systematic spending data at the level of departments and ministries, so we can actually trace the spending priorities along military, education, pension, infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. And we do that for 15 countries, going back to the 1870s, and expanding that to 30 countries, and rely on a broad range of official government sources and archival material. This is one of the central figures thus far for the G7 countries. And what you can see is that the blue line shows you the share of military expenditures in total budgets, central government budgets, averaged across the G7 countries, whereas the brownish line shows you the share of the budget that goes for social expenditures. So that's education, pensions, health, and various other social affairs expenditures. And what you can clearly see is that military expenditures are at a historic low. They have gradually decreased, especially since World War II. And at the same time, social expenditures have continued to rise and are now 5 times the size of military expenditures. So we're really reversing what was, we've seen a reversal of what was the case in the 19th century and prior to the world wars. The picture looks very similar if we place this in percent of GDP rather than percent of the total budget. Especially for the last 100 years, we see exactly the same trends. So social expenditures moving up, now above 10% of G7 country GDP on average, whereas military expenditures have fallen to below 2% of G7 GDP. And again, that's a 5-to-1 ratio. And we of course see these huge spikes in military spending during the world wars, but what's surprising is in recent years we see an increase in geopolitical risk, but there's no big change in the time series on military expenditures, right? So we see an increasing disconnect between geopolitical risks and military spending, and that's especially the case for Germany. So here, this is the picture for Germany since the founding of the Bundestag after World War II. And again, you see the brownish line social expenditures, the bluish line military expenditures, and you see a new line, which is the geopolitical risk index. This is by Caldara and Iacoviello, the most widely used geopolitical risk proxy out there. And according to their data, when you look at the red line, geopolitical risk of Germany in 2022 are comparable only to the level of the early 1960s. So we face severe geopolitical risk in current years, but we see very little change in the military expenditure data, or only very slowly moving up. So to conclude, we again live in dangerous times, but the data show that the military budgets in G7 countries have barely reacted to this new reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christoph. Guns versus butter is a question that history has thrown back at us now in full force. Prime Minister, can I start asking you, your situation is a very particular one in Latvia. How do you see these trade-offs? How have you navigated them in the past couple of years since our security situation has changed so dramatically? And how do you see the debate in Western Europe?
Yes, at first I would like to thank you all for inviting me here on this debate. About Latvia. Latvia became a member of EU in 20 years ago. And we are a member of NATO as well. But sure, as every country, one of the security targets is to pay out pensions. It's a normal, every state's priority that people who have worked their work life can receive pensions. But for each state, the main aim to have a state is its sovereignty, existence, security, and welfare. So starting from 2014, when the Crimea started, we didn't need to explain a lot to our society what really is going on. We understood that Russia is taking very strong and very aggressive steps towards other countries' sovereignty. And we are in a borderline with Russia and Belarus. And starting from 2014, we started to increase our defense expenditures. So we started to increase the finances for defense. It was not an easy thing to do. No one wants to spend more for arms when you have children in need, when you have health care, when you have social issues. Usually people don't want to think about military issues, but they have to, because otherwise, all those other reasons, we are spending money, we are having our everyday life, has no reason, because security is like umbrella over your head. Otherwise, if you are not protecting your state, you can get all wet. So all the other issues are not so important anymore. That's why we have increased our defense budget, and now it's 2.4% from our GDP, and we are increasing it till 3% till 2027. I understand that for European countries, it's a very difficult issue, but what can I see from our European Council meetings? More and more leaders are speaking out their policies, and we are speaking about Ukraine, we are speaking about change in geopolitical issues, and we are speaking about Europe, that we have to protect Europe. We cannot wait just from US to be our uncle who will come and to protect us when we will be in need, that we have to build up as well our security and our military capabilities. We promised Ukraine to give 1 million ammunition, and we cannot fulfill this promise because we just lack this ammunition, and some of the states don't want to give this ammunition, they want to sell it. So this is a change of mindset, and it's probably one of the tasks for me as a politician to explain to the society and other leaders that we really need to think about those geopolitical consequences if we are not defending ourselves. Because if we speak about Russia, that's not a country who will understand very polite, intelligent way how to diplomatically resolve the crisis. or how to resolve the end of the war. This is a state who will understand the language of strength, who will understand military capabilities language. If we will just promise something in very diplomatic way, but we will not feel that we are secure in a defense level, it will be very difficult to talk to them. We already will enter those negotiations with weaker position, in a sense that Russia has been able to raise up their military capabilities, what we saw in war with Ukraine. So that's why those political debates, we are talking with our people, societies, we have to explain how important it is that we are strengthening NATO. Now, 18 countries of NATO have their budget raised up to 2% from GDP. So it means we are already transforming our budget systems, and we are starting to understand that unfortunately, geopolitical situation which is made outside Europe is changing the situation also inside Europe. So unfortunately, we have to react in such a way that we have to do more in our defense.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Mr. Röttgen, I'm turning to you. You have been an observer of security, foreign affairs for a long time, chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Bundestag for a long time. Things have changed. Is Western Europe ready for that trade-off? Do we understand the dimensions of what Christoph just presented us? That we spent 3 to 4% of our GDP on defense not so long ago, and have reduced. We've taken that peace dividend and used it for other things. Are we ready to move back? Also, we've just seen that this country was paralyzed for a week or so over cutting subsidies for farmers, and they're worth 600 million. If Christoph is right, we permanently need to find another 100 billion to build up a military. How are we going to do this? And how's your party going to do with this?
So, on the one side, I think it's fair to say that from the backdrop of what you have found out, the discrepancy, the increasing discrepancy, which was related to a mentality, a quite pacifist mentality, and to the development of a certain political power mechanism. So how do you get elected? By promising more social spending, essentially. That from this backdrop, European societies and Germany, particularly, I would say for my country, that we have fundamentally changed. So there is a paradigm shift. The way we discuss security today, that we supply arms worth many billions to Ukraine fighting the Russian army. So unimaginable 2 Munich Security Conferences ago. So I think it's fair to say that there is a fundamental shift, particularly regarding the shift in the mindset of the people. I think this is absolutely there. And of course, there is also a shift in policy, because these are political decisions to spend the money, to supply the weapons, and so on. However, what we continue to fail to understand is the historic, and I would say moral and political level of seriousness, the historic dimension of what is going on, and what strikingly we seem not to understand, the we is the governments I'm talking about, including my government, but not only, perhaps including parties. I would not exclude any party, particularly in Germany, from that we haven't really grasped that our existential fundamental interests are affected by this war. We haven't really seen the dramatic consequences of the pure notion that this war could emerge, turn out to be, even to a limited degree, a success. And then war were to stay in Europe. And this would be the most expensive of all scenarios. There is nothing more expensive than war. And despite this reality, which I see as evident and compelling, and despite the fact that we do not have to decide between guns or butter, the economic and fiscal reality is that we can afford both, guns and butter. It doesn't take so much. 4 billion euros for weapons purchase in 1 year is not much in a federal budget of around about 475 billion euros. We can easily afford more. And what is at stake? The question of peace or war for our continent. If war were to stay, it would extend, and come closer also to us. So the falling back after the famous Zeitenwende speech of the Chancellor only 3 days after, which reflected a new approach, a fundamentally new approach, has not been sufficiently implemented. And there is a fallback to the old pattern of appeasing, glossing over, and not telling the truth, which is known by everybody. So there is not a lack of knowledge. We know it. And a final remark, because it is important to see that the deficiencies we have allowed to happen, which have resulted in a brutal, bloody military stalemate. It's because of the shortages of weapons and ammunition supply and production by the West. It's our failure. It's not the Ukrainians' failure, it's our failure. And what we see the results of this, and of course this could dramatically increase in what it means for us if Donald Trump gets re-elected. This would lead to a fundamental disruption of American foreign policy, to an immediate end of any military aid to Ukraine. And then we, the Europeans, will have to decide. The Chancellor answered already the question in Washington. He said America is indispensable. So this means Ukraine is lost if Donald Trump wins the election. I think we Europeans can't afford it. We simply can't afford to give up Europe. And what I really struggle to understand, why against this dramatic, evident, compelling backdrop, we have remained or have fallen back so quickly to the laziness of our political debates, the superficial character of these debates, and are not really living up to this moral and historic challenge we are facing. And again, I would say there is no reason to be really very, very glad and proud of any of the existing parties. We have clear motions. We are in favor of delivering cruise missile, the German cruise missile Taurus, and in increasing the spending. However, we have to answer the financial question as well, and we should put it more to the center of political debates and confrontation, I would say. Yes, but I think there is a lack of leadership across Europe, and this is at the heart of our problem.
Thank you, Mr. Röttgen. Niall, you've worked on these questions for a long time. Remember in the 1990s when the world was busy consuming the peace dividend, you were working on economics and power relations, writing two magnificent books. So now that the end of history is here, are we? What does history have to say?
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here. It's also, in many ways, a kind of reproach, because I tried in a number of books in the late 1990s and early 2000s to point out that the peace dividend was a delusion, and that if the West did not invest in its security, new threats would inevitably arise. When I saw Christoph's paper, I thought to myself, hang on, I did all this. I had those charts. I did those charts. Christoph, I'm sure you've methodologically improved. But the fundamental trajectory is exactly what appeared in my book, The Cash Nexus, which was published in 2001. So I'm here as a failure. I failed to make people understand the danger of underinvestment in national security and the delusion of a peace dividend. We had an interwar period after the collapse of the Soviet Union. It was bound to end if we behaved in this way. As you were talking, Mr. Röttgen, I was reminded of A.J.P. Taylor, who famously described 1848 as the turning point in history at which Germany failed to turn. And the Zeitenwende will go down in history as another of those turning points at which Germany failed to turn. The German defense budget, according to NATO's numbers, is about 1.49% of GDP. That is a scandalously low number, whether one accepts the geopolitical risk metric in Christoph's paper or not. It is historically a completely bizarre number, particularly when you consider that the US spends more like 3.5% of GDP on defense. Now, it's an axiom, and we've heard it from both the previous speakers, that in democracies, voters prefer butter to guns. They want social spending in all kinds of shapes and forms. They do not wish to spend on the military. It is the role of political leaders, we can see this in the case of a Churchill, to explain to voters why they must maintain the security of their country, because defense spending is an insurance premium in peacetime. It's paying insurance. At the height of World War II, Alan Brooke, who was the chief of the Imperial General Staff, and the man who probably saved the world, because Alan Brooke's strategic advice was nearly always better than Churchill's instinct. But in 1942, Alan Brooke wrote in his diary, shortly after the fall of Singapore, "We failed to pay the insurance premium." And we are doing exactly the same thing today, failing to pay an adequate insurance premium. That the US should spend so much more of its GDP on defense at a time when war is raging in Eastern Europe, one might even see in Central Europe, and in the Middle East, makes no sense. It's Germany that should be spending 3.5% of GDP on defense, not necessarily the United States, which is in a great deal more of a secure situation. Now, one reason this doesn't happen is, of course, German history. Another reason it doesn't happen is the German history of inflation and fiscal instability in the 20th century. And this leads to, I think, a particular German problem. The belief that one should under no circumstances use the instrument of public debt. Now, the history is very clear. Part of your insurance premium is consumption, and part of it is investment. And one can legitimately, in any sound theory of public finance, borrow to invest. And one should borrow to invest in national security, not just in order to enhance one's own defense and avert future war, but also because historically there are meaningful benefits, positive externalities to investment in national security. Silicon Valley wasn't invented so that people could share videos of cats on the internet. The reason that there is Silicon Valley is that the Department of Defense invested significantly in electronic networks, in computer networks, in order to enhance the national security of the United States. The idea of the internet originates in a strategic calculation that one had to, as far as possible, decentralize the communication system of the federal government in case of war. The United States is a shining example of the benefits of sustained investment in military technology. The last thing I want to say is, when I come to Germany, I'm constantly struck by the fact that it's the greatest economy of the 20th century. And unfortunately, we're now quite a way into the 21st century. I can't even get the app for the Munich Security Conference to work. And that should not be rocket science. Germany has an opportunity to invest in the new generation of military technology and to do it well. Luckily, this is happening. Companies like Auterion are pioneering drone warfare. In fact, I don't think many Germans realize just how far Germany is a player in the next generation of military technology. And the war in Ukraine illustrates that the war of the future will not be like the war of the past. Sure, superficially, it looks like World War I, superficially. But in reality, the battlefields of Ukraine are dominated by surveillance drones and loitering munitions, both of which have made weapons far more lethal than they've ever been in previous war, because they don't miss. Right now, as we are having this conversation in the beautiful spring-like conditions in Munich, Ukrainian soldiers are dying on the front line because there is no ammunition. And can you understand or imagine the degree of demoralization and disillusionment those soldiers must feel after all the fine promises that they heard from Western leaders? We'll be there as long as it takes. Herr Röttgen, we don't need Donald Trump to be elected. The money already stopped. It was cut off long before the presidential election because of the horse trading that goes on in the US House of Representatives. Ukraine was never adequately equipped to wage this war. At no point did we give the Ukrainians sufficient weapons to win. We gave them enough not to lose. We are now supplying them so that they are bound to lose. And we are in denial about what that means for us. If Ukraine loses this war, and I think it is highly likely on the present trajectory that that will happen, not this year, but at some future point, the costs of security for all the other European nations, the European NATO members, will soar, regardless of who is president. Even if Joe Biden's re-elected, US commitment to the defense of Europe is bound to wane. Why should the US spend 69% of the total NATO defense spending? 69%, more than 2/3, when it's Europe's security that's on the line, when it will be European states like yours, Madam Prime Minister, that will be the front line. It makes no sense. The reason I accepted Moritz's invitation to come today is that I passionately believe there needs to be a real Zeitenwende in this country, and not only in Germany, in all the European member states of NATO. It is time to get real about paying the insurance premium and investing in your national and continental security. The days of freeloading, of free riding on America's coattails, and here I speak as an American citizen, are over, whoever is president. It is time to get serious. I have heard enough phony speeches about strategic autonomy from European leaders to last me a lifetime. It's time to make that strategic autonomy a reality and recognize that your excuses for not doing so no longer carry any credibility, not in Washington, D.C., and not in the front lines in Ukraine. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Neil. I'm going to give you an opportunity to react and then also open it to floor, Prime Minister, Mr. Röttgen. Neil mentioned the domestic, and not only the big challenge and or potential failure to, or very real failure to stand up to it, but if we spend more on guns, are we cutting the butter? Are we going to do what I think historically is as Neil said, one of the ways to do that? Are we going to borrow to invest in our national security and with all the potential positive externalities? You think the country, your party, is ready for that, Mr. Röttgen?
First of all, my view is that the country, that the electorate, the voters, are ready for that. My assessment is, and it's not only an assessment, it's my experience out of so many debates in constituencies of colleagues and in universities, in schools, that what we call Zeitenwende has become rooted among our citizens. There is now, contrary to certainly the 90s, the 2000s and so on, there is now an open window for political decision making, for political leadership on security. I'm really convinced of that. Of course, not 100%, but we are a democracy. We don't need and we don't want to have 100%, but there is a broad supportive majority. So it's there. It's not the people. The people is a pretext, a pretension of politicians to behave according to the old patterns and lines. So the people have changed. There is an awareness what is at stake. Secondly, certainly, and no doubt about it, there is sufficient fiscal leeway to cope with these challenges, at least in the years to come. So you have to do it in a smart way. There is no sense in doubling the spending in 1 year. So it has to be a trajectory of an increase of spending, and we could, of course, well do that without not being able to buy the butter. We would not have to cut social spending if we were stagnant on the social budget and use the additional fiscal leeway for security. We would be fine in the years to come. And then there is, of course, space for prioritizing security and diplomacy and foreign policy without really putting a tangible burden on the welfare state. So there is such a big, large, convenient, comfortable welfare state. So cutting spending or being stagnant on social spending would be possible. And the third element, of course, would be to borrow for security, as we have done with the 100 billion Sondervermögen, which found and would not have been possible if the opposition, the CDU-CSU, would not have voted for it. And certainly, if there is a clear concept to make Europe and to contribute to European security, to live up to our responsibility in analyzing what is the situation in the United States, there is a readiness. We will have a two-thirds majority, both within Parliament and within the society. Perhaps only one sentence. It's not only out of American generosity that America has identified rightly after the Second World War and before, of course, and up to now, that security, stability in Europe is an eminent American interest, that the Europeans remain the most important allies. So I think there is a viable, deep American interest in preserving this alliance from the point of view of American interest. However, there has to be a fair division of burden sharing, and this has not been the case in the past, and we have to adapt. If we want, as Europeans, to preserve an American military presence in Europe, we should and have to step up our contribution to the burden sharing.
Prime Minister, you have you're on a trajectory to triple defense spending relative to GDP, I believe. What tips do you have for your Western European counterparts to do this?
Yes, it's not only Latvia who is expanding its defense budget, also Lithuania, Estonia, all the Baltic states, and I see Poland, Finland, I hope Sweden as well, becoming a member of NATO, at least within the European leaders table. We have been a good group, like how to say, very united group, saying that we have to take this very serious because we have to defend ourselves. And it's not just our, how to say, choice do we eat butter or not? Do we spend or not? It's our necessity. We have to do it. There is no other way for us. And unfortunately, yes, our security is on a stake because we are a borderline, and we have no time on so long debate. We had to make a decision 2014. We started to invest. Yes, it doesn't come very quickly. Manufacturing takes time to raise up your capabilities, to get IRIS-T, all those defense gadgets. It takes time to buy them, to have in line. Somebody else is producing them. Germany is not doing so quick, all those issues. So it is really a big risk for us not to be very quick. But yes, we are not very successful in our social sphere because we would like to have more, to spend more on pensions, on social security. But we also understand, like I'm looking on this bar, there is full of glasses. Instead of thinking what will be filled with, white wine or red wine, we understand if someone will come and break all the glasses, there will be no other choice of wine. There will be no glasses to pour the wine in. So that's about Europe today. If we really think that someone else will protect us, no, we are the ones. We have been very strong economy during those recent years, and Germany is one of the strongest economy. So we really have to show to other countries that we are capable of defending ourselves. But we were one of the first who gave military aid for Ukraine. They were ready to defend Kiev because we made decision some months before. We understood what's really going on. But it was, for them, it was very targeted, very needed, because we didn't lack decision. We had a decision on right time. It's also very important that we don't lose the time, because if we are too late, it also will be too late to defend ourselves. We gave 1% of our GDP to Ukraine, military aid, social aid, humanitarian help. We're doing rehabilitation for their army forces, for their people, but we also understand that we are not capable to do so much as Europe could do if we are united. We could be so much stronger if on the next level of our political debate after European elections and before European elections, we could really decide that defense is one of our European priorities, that military industry, which actually also can make money and make economy out of this, is one of our top priorities, that we will let our banks to spend on military industry. It will not be a risk zone for banks to go there. So this is one of the politicians' issues we have to decide. And I can see from von der Leyen, from the yesterday's announcement, that she is ready to do more on military defense and on military industry. So that's why Baltic states are now not just screaming loud because we don't know what to do. We know what to do because we have learned from our very bad experience during World War, during 50 years of occupation. And also Germany has learned, but there is, you know, in psychology, there's always some issues about traumas, what you've been traumatized by. We probably have been traumatized by Russians. That's why we scare so much, and we are one of the first who can react to protect, and probably Germans are traumatized by the war. They don't want to see this war on their borderline. But to do it, not to see the war in the borderline, we have to protect ourselves.
Excellent. I think we have time for maybe one very short question, maybe, yeah, over here, and maybe say briefly who you are.
I think we should all applaud the Europeans for the amount they have spent on Ukraine, which is more than the United States has by some when you take all kinds of spending together. And I think we should agree that it would be nice if they spent more. But the problem seems more political than technical. It may be that there is an abstract majority in some societies for spending more on this. But from a partisan point of view, that's far less clear. You don't need to look any further than the U.S. House of Representatives to see that it's not a desire not to spend on the military and instead spend on social spending that constrains American spending. It's a refusal by certain parts of the political spectrum, particularly the right, to spend, the American political spectrum, to spend that money on Ukraine. And in Germany, you have the same problem where the AfD is nipping at the CDU's heels. Sure. How do we solve that political problem, which is the binding constraint on doing anything in Ukraine?
So thank you for this question. I'd love to give it to Niall as the resident American on the board, but since you mentioned it, and I actually wanted to end on that note, the very same Christoph Trebesch who's there is the mastermind behind another product of the Kiel Institute that I think you all know and have used, is the Ukraine Support Tracker. And I think they've created an incredible public service there, public tool that has put pressure on governments, that have led to transparency. So Christoph, maybe we can give you a large applause for that fantastic work. And now Niall, please.
Yeah, and this Ukraine Support Tracker allows me to show US audiences just how far Europe has overtaken the United States in the past year. A year ago, the charts looked different. Andy, and you're quite right. And so it's extraordinarily important to have the data. You're right, Andy, also to ask, how do we make the politics work? It's something that I think Norbert Röttgen should comment on, because every centre-right party has the problem of the far-right party, and many of the far-right parties seem so ready to throw Ukraine under the bus that you have to wonder just how close their relations to the Putin regime are. And that is a really serious question to ask on both sides of the Atlantic. But the centre-left has its problem too, because the centre-left has its far-left so-called progressive wing, who make equally specious arguments, actually, not only on Ukraine, but on the Middle East. So I think there is a fundamental party political problem. A critical point that seems to me to offer hope is that historically the costs of borrowing are also low. Despite the uptick in inflation that we saw in 2022, the trend, I think, for borrowing costs is downward. And so in fiscal terms, the political economy isn't as hard as it looks. The real problem, and this is a major political problem that you didn't allude to, is the aging population problem. Because it's the aging population problem that drives up the social spending. I'm pretty sure you'd see that in the data. It would be nice to hold social spending steady in Germany and indeed in other European countries. Good luck with that, given the demographic profile. So I sometimes think that the party political gridlock that you see in different contexts is a reflection of structural problems that no political leader can easily override. That is what makes me somewhat nervous about how things will go. Because I don't think, regardless of the outcome of the presidential election, it's going to be very easy to get additional aid for Ukraine through the House. I mean, I think that's a harsh reality that we need to face. Last year I heard, and I'll be very brief and shut up. Last year I heard, oh, it will be so terrible if Donald Trump is elected. Europeans love to exaggerate his importance. The problem has already arisen long before the election. And the problem of the AfD is not about to go away in Germany. And it's going to make it very difficult to deliver on the relatively mild recipe that we were offered of a gently rising defense budget and a freeze on social spending. Actually, Germany needs to be much more like Latvia. It needs to get fast to a defense spending that's double what it currently is. We don't have 10 years. Our time frame is never going to be that long. And just to make a final observation, one of the things that led to appeasement in Britain was the 10-year rule. We don't really need to deal with this problem because the next war won't be for 10 years. Fatal, fatal mistake. Your time horizon is not 10 years. It is conceivably 10 months as far as the fate of Ukraine and the security of Central and Eastern Europe is concerned.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Röttgen. Do you want to say? Oh, then it's. I think. Well, we're out of time. I should have added. I didn't. There is a big new update of the Ukraine Support Tracker this afternoon. So new data are coming. Thank you so much for the panel. Thank you so much for Munich Security Conference for hosting this. It was fantastic. I learned a lot. Let's give a big applause to our panelists. Thank you very much.